Going. So thank you for all being here. My name is Dr. Megan Kirby, and we're here to talk about you're going to be kind of disappointed in me, but that's okay. Hold your breath. We're only talking about the relationship between language comprehension and executive functioning this webinar. So, with that being said, we're going to lay the foundation and the groundwork for us to be able to move from here today in this event to then capitalize on our prior background knowledge, which we all know is really important to language comprehension, and move then into what to do about what we learned tonight slash this afternoon slash this morning. And we're going to get into that soon. So I want to go ahead and show you this is the agenda for our webinar. I'm going to do a brief introduction. I'm going to go over executive functioning. What the heck is it in a 101? This is not a university graduate level course on this topic. I myself had a refresh on my knowledge. By no means am I an expert. In fact, no one should be an expert in anything because that suggests that you're done learning. So beware of people who call themselves experts, by the way. Language comprehension, we're going to go over that. Then number 4, I'm going to talk about the relationship between language comprehension and executive functioning. Probably I'm going to talk about that with between numbers 2 and 3 as well. It's hard to piece them apart and compartmentalize, so apologize, but I'm going to get a little bit more into it. Number 5 is practical implications of what we learn today, like in this moment, right? And then where do we go from here? And like I said before, there's going to be a follow-up webinar about, yeah, this is great, but what do I do about it? And that's going to take a whole nother hour, y'all. So we will take care of you coming soon. I've already started to prepare those webinar slides. Otherwise, this would have been probably 3 hours. Questions and answer time. I probably will have some of that throughout. Christy is here. She's our dissemination implementation specialist with Language Dynamics Group. We work closely together. And if you have any questions that you want answered, the Q&A section of Zoom is there for you to do so, and we will answer them, and she'll let me know that I need to pause, or we can hold those to the end. Last but not least, there's always that end of webinar certificate, and there are going to be 3 quiz questions that are on there. Do not freak out right now. If you have to leave early from this live webinar, there's going to be the recording that is going to be presented to you in a follow-up email or recap with other materials. And at that time, you can go ahead and rewatch this. I will also go over the answers to anything I give. We are all adults, and open book exams are the best. So without further ado, on my end, here's the full package of tools that we have developed at Language Dynamics Group. The researchers, the inventors are going to be Doug Peterson and Trina Spencer. And then the people that help make it work are all of these folks right here. Okay, so we've got the Steve. So if you've ever purchased anything from Language Dynamics Group that was shipped to you, please thank the folks that are in the upper left-hand corner. If you are working on research and you're in New Mexico right now, which I didn't see anybody from New Mexico, going to be down in our right-hand corner. Cameron's helping run this huge randomized control trial right now, and she'll be in Japan soon in January, and then in Australia in April, and so on and so forth. Olivia Peterson down middle is our graphic designer, who we have all of the credit to in terms of why what we do works and making it visually appealing. Shane and Mike are going to be your sales folks, and then Christy and I are going to be your implementation dissemination folks. So all things questions from this webinar right here, or in the future about implementation of anything, there is no such thing as quote unquote a stupid question. It means that you don't have the tools at hand to answer your question, and that's what we're here for. So, all right. I wish I need to buy a little drum machine that would be right here for me. That's not, yeah, I'm gonna get sidetracked already. I can tell. Get really excited when it's webinar day. Assessment intervention. Here's the purpose of all that we do. We are evidence first, implementation ready tools for you. All right. There's an average, I think it's slightly shorter now, but it used to be on the street, you would hear 17-year research to practice gap. That means from day one, I, as a researcher, I could be a doc student or a grad student, doesn't matter. But if I have an idea about an intervention, I have to then study it. And typically what happens is there's a pilot research, and it should be when you're doing pilots, you don't have a lot of money, especially if you're a student. You typically do things that are really good in terms of causal efficacy research, and those are going to be single case research designs, really strong, but they're small n, meaning you might have a population of anywhere between 3 people. One person is like iffy. I haven't seen any studies with just one participant lately. And I teach behavior analytic courses, so like I really haven't seen any. But 3 to then I have done single case research that is, up to 20 participants. So, but that's small. That's not a randomized control trial, right? Those are piloting. So you can imagine that. And then guess what? You're doing an iterative design of, you get feedback of whether or not something works. That is Story Champs, Cubed, Pearl, Diamond. Over time, the amount of years it takes to get something from research into the hands of practitioners is what people were saying was 17 years. Again, I think it's like 15. It might be 17 for educational and social like interventions. Medical devices, it's shorter now because there's money to be made there. So we are here for you as the publisher, as the researchers and the publishers, to shorten that gap. If you are familiar at all with the Diamond that came out at the beginning of this year, we got that out real quick. Story Champs AAC is now out after probably, there was a lot of research behind it, but between, piloting the initial programs and like the lessons and the stories and getting them screened by actually AAC users and teenagers, who are mean, by the way. If you work with adults, I want to be like, hands up if you work with adults or teenagers or adolescents, but holy cow, kudos to you. If you're Catholic, you get this get out of purgatory free card. So mean. So like, that's one of those aspects where I think about, we still shortened it. So it took about, 3 years to really get something that we know works. And there's already research published about it showing it works, right? So that's also evidence first is important to us. We will not publish anything unless it has shown that it is effective first. If you're unfamiliar with any of these things, I know I have a lot of folks attending this webinar that might be first time, maybe long-time listeners, first time attendees. Otherwise, might be, first time attendees and first time ever learning about Language Dynamics Group. Check these things out. All awesome. I work for Language Dynamics Group because I truly believe in all of these tools. Now, we are also excited. I'm putting these all first to get these out of the way because in case we run out of time later. But we have some upcoming additional free webinars in January. We have one free one every month, ideally, unless there's like things happening in our lives and we need to skip a month for our sanity. January, we are going to show you how to do the next innovative step in narrative retail language sampling, auto scoring of the narrative language measures retail. So if a student listens to a story or reads a story and they retell that same story, how do we auto score that and check and improve our accuracy? Especially, how do we get others to use it that may not be trained as well as a special ed teacher? Or, I was a special ed teacher, so I wasn't trained in any of this. Speech and language pathologist, and how do we scale use of these tools like the cubed narrative language measures, auto scoring? So we're going to go over that. You can register now. In February, we're going to have a very special event. It's a live Trina and Doug in the same room together. I don't know exactly what room. I got to figure that out. But we will be at the National Association of School Psychologists conference, annual conference, NASP is what it's called, in Chicago on this particular date, February 25th. Note the time difference. We're going to do a webinar an hour earlier. But we're going to talk all things comprehension with Trina and Doug. So you can, in the chat, Chrissy is putting the links if you do not feel like holding up your phones and scanning these to go ahead and register. And again, we will put these registrations into the chat later on too if you missed this. And last but not least, here's what I was talking about. The next slide, I'm going to get it right into the content that we're talking about tonight. Narrative intervention. How does it improve executive functioning and language comprehension? Today's webinar will go over the relationship between executive functioning, language comprehension, and how do they relate to one another? How do they affect one another? How does it affect reading comprehension overall? And then you're going to be left with, yeah, that's nice, but. And that little voice in the back of my mind when I was making these slides today led to this webinar. The soonest I could get it on the calendar was March. If you are dying for answers now, you may always reach out to us. I will provide you with some tips as much as I can possibly do so. And in the chat, go ahead and sign up for this particular webinar where we will go over answers that are practical applications. Is it that you have to have story champs, the narrative intervention that we publish? No. So I'm going to give you practical, actionable tips for you to work on these things. Maybe accommodations for kids that do not have specialized educational plans, right? So your quote unquote typical student who might be all over the place or undiagnosed, presents with features that look eerily similar to attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, right? I will give you some tips. So sign up for this. I can't make it. You're always going to be given access to the recording. Right. Now, that gets us to, thank you again, Chrissy, for putting all of the registrations for these webinars. They're free, okay, into the chat, and we shall get started. So I definitely, I really had to refresh my memory. How many of you, I would just like a thumbs up because I do believe that you guys can participate in terms of feelings. If not, you can just put a Y into the chat. How many of you are familiar with executive function? You feel like you understand what it is. So if a student or a child had executive functioning difficulties, you would be like, yes, I can definitely point them out. I know what's executive functioning. Okay, this is great. This is great. I'm getting some thumbs up, but it's about a third of the folks that are on this event live today. Okay. So I'm just going to point out, I don't want to talk down. I'm not going to preach to the choir either. Executive functioning. We are going to go at it as a construct. So it's generally conceptualized as a set of like very specific cognitive abilities, right? So private events that you and I as interventionists, teachers, we can't measure unless that child is saying, right now I'm using my inhibitory control. We can't measure it. So, but we can measure things that are signs of its presence. Okay. Nonverbal inhibition is one of them. Cognitive flexibility. All of us need to still practice all of these things. Higher level planning and monitoring processes, working memory, attention to task, right? Initiation. All of these things come under this umbrella of executive functioning. And typically we start to notice that children have difficulties with EF or executive functioning skills in early elementary, early primary grades. And what we're talking about is preschool, pre-K, and then we would go into maybe grade 2, year 2. And at that time, a lot of these children are also identified as having dyslexia, dysgraphia, particularly by year 3 or grade 3, about 8 years old, where they start being identified with dyslexia. I say dysgraphia because we're going to associate that also with writing difficulties. We're going to talk about language comprehension or reading comprehension problems that's not related to dyslexia. ADD, attention deficit disorder, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and autism spectrum disorders, the whole range. So comorbidity and executive functioning difficulties like go hand in hand. And so we do not know, it's kind of the chicken and the egg situation. We don't know in research what causes what, or maybe is executive functioning its own thing where you have deficits in this, and it's not related at all to any of those other comorbid presentations. We're not sure. So I just want to point that out. There is nothing proving that if you have one of these issues, you will absolutely have executive functioning difficulties. This is not true. Same goes with if you have reading comprehension problems, you will have executive functioning difficulties. There's no causation, there's just correlations. Now, the most prominent model I put up here is the researcher Miyake. And a lot of the language literacy educational space literature talks about three constructs. You may or may not hear about them: inhibitory control, working memory, cognitive flexibility. The last being like the key hot topic, especially. The more of us, I think the latest rate was like, what was it? 1 in 31 individuals in the United States of school age might have an autism spectrum disorder. Seems crazy to me that it went like that. And I taught a long time ago. When I say long time, I mean like 15 years, not that long. And it was not that. So we are going to go over what these skills actually mean, and especially those particular parts. And do so, I'm also going to go over them, and then we're going to talk about them together as a group. So this construct, executive functioning, EF, we have inhibitory control. This is one of the main parts. So if there are three, it's inhibitory control, working memory, cognitive flexibility. The three on the left are all decidedly considered to be executive functioning skills. Anything else on the right, and then the following slide I'm going to show you, are going to be other skills that some other researchers have parsed out to be like more finite or more objective. So, but on the left-hand side, let's talk about these now. Inhibitory control, the ability to restrain your habitual responses, response inhibition, fancy term for the ability to, like, if you're bored, not yawn when you're in front of a big group, right? So there's that, being aware, and that goes back into how closely these things are tied with social skills, right? Like how your behavior affects other people, and knowing that then affects like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this right now. So just kind of keep that in mind. Working memory. This is easier for us to understand because we see it a lot too. We hear and see short-term memory is an issue. The process of holding information and manipulating this temporary information in mind to support whatever the task it is that you're doing at hand. Okay, so that is super, super important. So doing this. Hey, Christy, can you post the link to the slides in the chat? Because got some folks.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay. So the ability to consider multiple pieces of information, that's cognitive flexibility, to consider them simultaneously and switch between them. I just want to point out that is research, and it's pretty decided. There is no such thing as multitasking. Yet all of us as adults, man, we could try to, one of my favorite quotes is from this woman, Dr. Linda Hayes, who says, you could try to do it all, but you're not going to do any of it particularly well. Okay. And it goes hand in hand. I love that quote because it is true. We have to be able to stop what we're doing, switch, and apply only relevant stimuli to whatever the task is at hand. And that goes again back to working memory. I need to have and be able to pull information at this moment from short-term memory to the task at hand and get it completed, the task at hand, and try to ignore irrelevant stimuli. All right. So those things right there on the left-hand side are going to be key aspects of what may or may not affect our comprehension of language, our ability to produce, understand, and then demonstrate knowledge of comprehension of what it is we read or listen to. Metacognition is another. Metacognition is the ability to then self-reflect on thoughts, our mental processes, assess effectiveness. I'm going to go ahead. I put a pin in this. This is super important to comprehension of language, okay? Whether it's what you read or what you're listening to, oral retell, the ability to know that you understand patterns in language and like, oh yeah, I'm looking for like in the narrative structure. So in what we have for language comprehension, we have discourse structure. And let's say we're doing narrative discourse structure. So stories have identifiable patterns where it's character, problem, setting, all of these, excuse me, totally out of order just too excited. Character, setting, problem, feeling, action, ending, and feeling. It's literally my job. I should know this. The ability to then say, okay, there's this pattern when I'm listening to someone tell a story and it's missing any of those pieces. I'm going to raise my hand and be like, wait a minute, hold on, I need some clarifying information. Right. So not word for word. No, it would be really weird if kids said that. But I would definitely say that when we realize that there is a pattern, our brains look for patterns. We need to think about, is it working for us or not? Are the strategies, is what we're doing working? And if it's not working, we need to stop doing it. It would be a waste of human calories, caloric kcals, by the way, and of that effort. And that's just not human behavior, is to waste kcals. So then we have attentional control, right? Attentional control, it's an executive functioning skill that is going to require us or allow us, excuse me, the ability to focus on a particular stimulus, regardless of what else is going on around us in the classroom, or there's music playing in the background, environmental distractions, fatigue. All right. Attentional control, understanding that I'm reading this, I might be tired, but the importance of it. That also goes into metacognition, is understanding like right now what I'm doing, and I'm tracking with my finger, but that's not working. I need to get a ruler out so I can like stay with it. So those kind of problem solving techniques and activities that we do. All right. Then I'm going to throw up right here a quick, wait, I believe I have these polls. Here we go. All right. I am actually just super curious. Save. Okay. I'm going to try to put it up there. I'm curious to you all, or for you all, which of these items, inhibition, metacognition, working memory, what is your biggest challenge with executive functioning, if those are the three categories that I'm giving you, with your students or clients? So there is a poll that's up right now. I would like to know, what are you seeing as the biggest issue? If you can only pick one, priorities and trade-offs right now. I know they're like pretty comorbid, but what is the biggest issue that you're seeing influence or impact your students or clients' abilities to be able to complete the tasks that you're working on with them at hand? Okay, right now, I've got Gabriella saying like, yes, it's working memory. In our poll right now, I've got other folks, working memory is winning right now. Mallory, though, is saying inhibitory control, like the ability to like just stop and not engage in other responses other than this task at hand. Okay. All right. So I'm going to give it about 10 more seconds. Go ahead and put in your vote. I've only got 76 voters. Come on, y'all. 77. Let's get it till 80. I'm just curious. So right now, metacognition is the least, and working memory is the most difficult. And then some of our comments right here, which I think are very valid. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Mallory, for making these comments. You know, you've got younger ones, you're going to have a bigger problem with all of these because they're developing them. But by third grade, year 3, they should be developed in terms of if they're still struggling with them, there's an issue. Elizabeth puts, I feel like I can support work on inhibition and metacognition, which is great. I love hearing this, but working memory is a lot harder to work on. I hear this a lot. Okay. I hear working memory. I hear we all know the retired in place folks, because they're not on this. They're not on this webinar at all. Because that would be in addition to what they're doing day-to-day jobs. But those RIP teachers or RIP speech language pathologists or whatever specialists, when I hear them complain, it's always short-term memory. I'll go out and I'll train and be like, well, my kid can't do this. They can't retell a story because of their short-term memory. And I'm just going to tell you right now, that is not true. There is no rule. There is no research saying just because you have short-term memory issues, which, by the way, unless it's diagnosed, that I don't know what you're talking about. So again, we want to be able to test these to show that there is actual short-term memory issues. Unless you have a TBI, which my husband has had before. So I legitimately understand short-term memory loss. I'm just telling you right now, like we can't give that excuse. So when folks are saying that, I do not want us to reinforce the saying of like, well, they can't do this because they have short-term memory issues. Because if you can teach the brain about patterns, it overcomes those things, right? Because our brains actually thrive and strive for solving patterns that overcomes any short-term memory issues. Okay, we have a whole nother slide. I'm so sorry. There's more. Um, this is okay. So this is just really why it's so confusing to hear that a student struggles with executive functioning skills, because I've been thinking about this like, well, what areas? To me, it's like hearing someone talk about this student can't comprehend. As a language comprehension researcher and interventionist, I'm sorry, what? Like, what part of comprehension are you talking about? Because I will have people come to me and say, he can't comprehend. Is it vocabulary? Is it discourse structure? Is it background knowledge? Like, there are all these other sub skills. So, if by breaking these down for you in the research literature, I went and found as many as I possibly could. This should help us be able to be a little bit more specific about what issues our students or clients might be having with executive functioning. Okay. So, in this particular one, initiation, task initiation. Welcome to like most students if they're not motivated. So this is heavily influenced by motivation. And that goes into, is our environment, our teaching environment motivating? Do kids actually want to be here right now? And if not, we need to start from ground zero. What I used to do if that tabletop or that room is conditioned to be aversive, so I would absolutely have to paint that room. If folks who use drugs, who are using intravenous drugs like heroin or something, and they end up shooting up in an environment, let's say it's like a basement, and they come home after going to rehab and they're living right back in that same environment, it's conditioned to have certain properties. It's conditioned with stimuli. It's conditioned with feelings, the reinforcers, the antecedents, all of these things. Same thing goes for school, y'all. Like, I don't know, we're not using the research that we already know, but if there's an environment that is not conditioned to be like, oh, you are successful, child, like you are going to rock it, versus, oh, you stink at math or you stink at reading, and I'm going to put you right back at the same desk that you always read at, or where I'm going to bring you, when I do pull out therapy, into the same room that you've been struggling in for 3 years so far. We got to stop it. Okay. Because initiation has nothing to do with that. The motivation would be the issue. Okay. So initiation is, let's say everything is really, really great and sunshine, everything is awesome, and it's Legoland. At that point, the response effort, meaning the amount of effort it would take to even just initiate that task. It's not like I'm asking them to change a tire on a car. It should be easy. If that's the case and they still can't do it, then I'm looking at executive functioning skills. So I want to clarify that. Planning, boy, the ability to prioritize priorities and trade-offs, which is what I love about what Dr. Spencer talks about all the time. And it's this phrase that I would say that like she coined in my family trait, right? There's always priorities and trade-offs, but you have to prioritize like what needs to come now, and then we can get to other things later. That is a skill that we work on our whole lives. Okay. But this is very relevant in terms of language comprehension and the ability to comprehend information, because we're looking at, how am I going to tackle this 3-paragraph text or this reading? Okay, how am I going to be able to attack this and go into it? Do I read the topic sentences first? Am I going to read the questions first and then go back and then read the text? So there's all these different strategies that we could possibly teach folks to then kind of adhere to what their strengths are, teach to their strengths. Organization, categorizing, organizing stimuli. This also goes into like discourse structure. If you can learn the patterns of, let's say, information passages, you've got all of these different types of discourse structures for expository discourse. You've got cause and effect, how to, you've got main idea, key details. You've got biography, right? Which is almost like a narrative timeline. Yeah. So if you can order that information so that you can retrieve it and come back to it later, even better. But we have to teach patterns first, right? Self-regulation. I'm still struggling with this one. I don't know how many of you thumbs up. I always like to get like people so know I'm not like alone, but the ability to behave in a certain way to achieve goals. The amount of times I remember being the teacher being like, "You're too emotional," when I would get very passionate about my students and very, yeah, into it. But this right here, modeling that, and it's something that we learn across a lifetime. But how do we behave to achieve goals in terms of reading? Right? So I'm not going to be silly and out of my seat if my goal is I would just want to first then read this passage and then get to the activity at hand. Switching and shifting, another one that's also like inhibitory control. And then response to feedback. How do I adjust my behavior to according to my environment? I'm presented with this information, new information, to then increase the chance of a positive outcome. It sounds super, all of these sound super vague, but if you think about them, whatever your example that you're thinking of in your mind, most likely fits this. Okay. So you're not going to be too far off. It's not like, oh, these are too silly for me. Welcome to research. We kind of put names on things that could be more easily explained using layman's terms. Yes, parsimony is what we need to be more parsimonious as researchers. Okay, inhibitory control. Now, I want to get into how does this affect us? So, inhibitory control, this is one of our first three. The ability to inhibit thoughts, so private events, actions, public behavior, like behaviors in the face of any internal, like I'm getting really tired right now. I really want to go get coffee. No. I need to focus. I just need to finish what I'm reading and then I can go do it. That right there is inhibition, right? That's an executive functioning skill that helps me meet the task at hand, get my goals done, and then move on. So it's your ability to inhibit thoughts, actions, behaviors in the face or appearance of internal or external stimuli. Like right now, my partner, my spouse has turned the heat up in the house and I am going through that time of life where I'm super hot right now. It's not well. So how do I inhibit my thoughts or behaviors in the face of this external stimuli to finish this webinar? Right? Inhibition. Okay. We also, when we're reading, we have to ignore irrelevant stimuli or information so that we can have this this appropriate mental representation of what we're reading. The text we're reading, if there's no pictures, I'm going to have a mental representation of what it is that I'm reading. I need to then get rid of all the extraneous variables that might be in that passage. Do I hyper focus on the name? Am I focused on external stimuli, some of these other characters and their actions or where they're at or the setting? No. So that comes with practice. And if you have issues with inhibitory control, you're going to have issues with being able to focus on those things. If individuals have difficulties at this level, they typically will have reading comprehension difficulties, and they are going to use irrelevant information at a higher rate. Okay, so they are going to respond or key into irrelevant information within a passage at a higher rate if they have issues with inhibition. A lot of folks will then have difficulty also maintaining or like keeping a hold of that working memory thing of relevant information. So not only are they attending to irrelevant information, they are not retaining and then being able to recall any of the relevant information. I am going to point out that like there's research in here in the upper left-hand corner that I put, and I'm going to show you some references in the slides later, but this isn't like a causal tie. So the research shows like sometimes inhibition affects reading comprehension, sometimes it doesn't. It's kind of in the middle right now, which is why I'm putting it first. It's also closely related to expressive syntax. So folks did an executive functioning task and a bunch of assessments that were supposed to measure inhibition. And they correlated it with scores on the SELF, the clinical evaluation of language fundamentals. So they correlated these scores and they found, hey, students that had issues with expressive syntax also had really a lot of issues with inhibition on this executive functioning test. So take that for what that's worth. It might be worth looking into. If you perform the SELF, you have access to those scores. Maybe there's also some executive functioning tasks or assessments that have been done for your students by a school psychologist, let's say. If you want any ideas for what kind of assessments are out there, you're going to email me later and I can give you some of those because maybe there are in the child's file. What do we do about that? You're going to attend in March. I'm so sorry. So like I'm such a pain in the butt by not giving you these answers now. All right, Chrissy, how are we doing with comments or Q&As? Just checking. All right. I think we are good.
Yes, we are good. So sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm just looking right now too. Okay. So working memory. This is considered lower order executive functioning. So because it's just like really quick, pretty innate process of temporarily storing information, manipulating it, deciding if you need to recall it or not, and throwing it away if it's not relevant, right? It is so crucial to everyday actions and behaviors that have to deal with language comprehension, learning, day-to-day learning, and reasoning, being able to make inferences or rational decisions, problem solving, those things, because you have to have information at hand. Again, priority, think about that phrase, priorities and trade-offs. All right, you have to kind of know what the priorities are for you to be able to be like, oh, I don't need to do this right now. It's most closely associated or linked to receptive language. So any issues with receptive language and maybe some short-term memory issues, that is going to influence comprehension. That is going to influence the ability for students to integrate new knowledge with pre-existing knowledge and background knowledge, right? So I just really want to point that out, that that is what we know so far from the literature. And then last but not least, when it turns out for executive functioning, metacognition. This underlies all types of learning disabilities. We're talking about math, dysgraphia, you got writing, but it's really, really closely related to reading disabilities and not on the word learning side. So word recognition skills like decoding, reading fluency, it's not that. Impairments in metacognition are usually difficulties with the inhibitory control, task initiation, and self-monitoring. All right. Is what I'm doing working? If not, I need to stop doing it. That kind of thing. If you have any students that might be like doing stuff that's not working for them and they keep doing it, this is that area that we need to work on. After like even thinking about some of the research that's out there, reading comprehension. So that end all be all, the ultimate outcome that we want, the true reading outcome. If there's issues there, it might be brought on by ineffective strategy planning, by difficulties with organizing. That's all related to metacognition. So let's say that you don't have any inhibitory control issues, you don't have attention issues, you don't have decoding problems, you don't have fluency problems, you don't have issues with vocabulary. So like these are those students where I'm like, I don't know what is going on because they tested just fine, air quotes fine. Then I'm looking at planning and organizing. Are we using tests? Am I assessing their ability, their executive functioning skills with planning and organizing? And if not, we need to get a test that actually measures that, because it might be metacognition that is affecting their reading comprehension outcomes, which is directly related to that language comprehension. Okay. So again, I can send you some meta-analyses of assessments that have been used or are used to measure these things and these discrete skills. So let me know if you need anything. All right, we are at question 1. I want you to write down the answer because you're going to need it when we get to the quiz at the end to get your certificate. But what behavior is defined as the process of holding and manipulating temporary information? You all know because I gave you the answer. The answer is working memory. Susan, yes. I can give you a high five because I said it. Good job. Typed it in before I said it. So working memory, remember, it's the brain's ability to temporarily hold and manipulate information that we need for cognitive tasks. It's not quite short-term memory. That means we store information for a brief period of time. But working memory, the key word is working. Working memory, we're actively processing and using that information. So there's stuff in our short-term memory problems does not equate to working memory. Okay. So that's, again, goes back to why I just don't like that excuse for why something may not be working for a student or why someone may not use an intervention because he has short-term memory issues. Different from working memory. All right. Language comprehension. I'm going to go over this pretty I'm not going to say quickly, I'm going to go over this pretty much in relation to executive functioning. All right. So if you need more information about language comprehension, we have tons of YouTube videos on language comprehension that you can go into and dive into. All right. Here is a very simple view of reading. The simple view of reading is a theory, right? It's not like a rule. It posits that decoding or word recognition skills multiplied by language or language comprehension equals true reading or reading comprehension. Anytime someone says reading, I'm trying to move us away from saying word reading. Reading is the combination of these two things. So anything times zero is going to be zero. So if my language comprehension is really poor, like that, really weak, and I could read words all day, but I can't tell you what it is that I read, it's because I have issues with language comprehension. This is the area where we need to be better at assessing so that we can identify students and intervene early with language comprehension. We can do so and intervene with language comprehension before students even read. Okay, so the time to teach comprehension is not when they start to actually be able to read words. It's way before that. Soapbox. So thank you. Thanks, Nicole. All right, so Scarborough's Reading Rope. I'm hoping you all are familiar with it. If not, but here's a much prettier version. We have the other band that's green that goes into word recognition that's down below. Not showing it during this webinar because it's not the focus of it. But we prettied it up. I love this graphic. If you are working with other folks that may not understand what language comprehension or word recognition skills are, and they need more examples, like things in parentheses, please email us. Christy and I will it's training@languagedynamicsgroup.com. It's like, there's our website. You can even email us on our website and message us. Please ask for this. We will give you the graphic. Okay. It's a PDF. Background knowledge. So that is important, right? If we think about it, facts and concepts needed for text to world connections. This is your student where if we have issues with executive functioning, meaning recall, working memory, we're looking at organizing, having schemas set up. I might not be able to think about past lived experiences and tie them to what's being read at hand. Okay. But that's pretty rare. Background knowledge is a strength for most of our students with executive functioning skills. Just gonna throw that out there. Vocabulary, also considered a strength for a lot of folks with executive functioning deficits or difficulties. Let's get rid of the word deficits. With difficulties in executive functioning. And vocabulary seems not to be tied to that at all. So take that for what you will. The last three here: language structure, verbal reasoning, literacy knowledge. Okay, language structure, having that sentence level, even word level, those connection words, having difficulties using them, using complex sentences, knowing how to organize, and again, recognizing patterns at the sentence level. Difficulties executive functioning are going to affect that. Difficulties with language comprehension in that area are going to absolutely influence your ability to then engage in executive functioning skills. So it's this reciprocal relationship. Verbal reasoning, I'm going to get to that in the next slide. And then literacy knowledge, discourse structures, understanding that language has patterns. Expository and narrative language have differing patterns. And once you learn the pattern, your brain goes to look for them and you're able to make predictions. So it's like all of this domino effect that we have going on. These poor kids. I just think about this, or poor us. I mean, we were in these little like buckets too. But how can we more better suit or tailor instruction to it? Again, sign up for that March webinar. But here's some ideas. Like figurative language, we all know, important component of this overall broader construct of language comprehension. Okay. The figurative language, like what I mean by this, we're talking about abstract words. We're talking about idioms, similes, metaphors, fables, even. I like to talk about how we need to first understand the literal narrow meaning of words before we're reading something in context and go, oh, this doesn't make sense in this context. It must have a different meaning. Holy metacognition, right? The verbal reasoning aspects of language comprehension are going to be very difficult for our students. You have to know the literal meanings of these individual words. You also then need to understand how context clues work, like how you should if something seems a little off, stop, reread it, go back, right? And try to make sense of why this doesn't make sense. That requires metacognition, that requires self-reflection. These things can be taught, by the way. So, like, it's what you're already doing in your day-to-day jobs. It might just take an extra step. We're just more cognizant of it, of what's going on. Now, developmental difficulties usually in the area of figurative language, verbal reasoning, and executive functioning, like having difficulties in the both of those things. Woo, learning disabilities. So we might see specific learning disabilities in language or reading. And it is coming in those areas. Now, inferential thinking, the ability to make predictions, problem solve, make hypotheses, connections, again, has to deal with a lot of that working memory. So we just read that the child was running late to school and he missed the bus. So when I ask the student, how do you think he's going to get to school? You have to hold that information that just read pages ago where he missed the bus. And then you have to think about, did I read anything about a parent being home or maybe a neighbor being home or the fact that there's another bus coming because we live in the city, those aspects. So I'm putting that out there. All of these variables for executive functioning, like cognitive flexibility, organization, metacognition, are going to influence a child's verbal reasoning skills and vice versa. It also will affect writing. Okay, so narrative writing, what we've found is that executive functioning difficulties and writing specifically because of the planning and organization stages are going to significantly influence that comprehension of language and the ability to produce language in a written format. Now, you can't write what you can't say. So if a learner is able to say what they wrote and it all makes sense, then I can rule out it's not executive functioning, it's not language comprehension. It might be dysgraphia, it might be an actual like orthography, writing, spelling issue, which is not related to comprehension at all. We have a whole webinar on writing that is free on our YouTube channel. Now, if you are unfamiliar, the Cubed 3 is one of our assessments. It's free to download the paper pencil format of the assessment. Feel free to use it. We have a writing rubric so that you can measure all of these things. So what you see on here, you're going to be able to measure critical thinking skills. So in one language sample, in one written language sample, you can get all of these things, and it is super helpful, again, for reevals or something like that. So just a little like plug for this free assessment that obviously I'm not making any money on. So Nicole asks, is this the flowchart? And the answer is yes. The NLM or narrative language measures flowchart is the writing rubric that I am referring to. Thank you for that clarification. So thank you. All right. Question number 2, you're going to need this for the quiz before we get into the last remaining parts of the slides. What is the theory that posits that language comprehension and word recognition are necessary for reading comprehension or true reading? It's simple view of reading. I may have changed this question. Now that I'm thinking about it. I didn't like this question. I may have changed this question on the quiz, but whatever it is, it's going to be super easy for you. It's probably something like inhibitory control. I'll get you guys. I will correct this later. Surprise. All right. Relationship between language comprehension and executive functioning. Here's what I think you all really want, a lot more information that you really want to know. Okay. I am, and by the way, Artie, I do see your question for the Q&A. So I'm going to just give you a little bit more information. Okay, good. Updated quiz question. Which of these skills is not associated with constructive language comprehension? Okay, everybody in the chat, this is important. Christy will also post the answer. But we're looking at what's not language comprehension. Figurative language, I just talked about as being a part of language comprehension. Phonemic awareness, narrative language, or background knowledge. So which is not? Don't you just hate it when tests have the not question? All right. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you all. All right, good. Thanks for rolling with going with the flow. I really appreciate you all tonight. It's getting close to the holidays and I am not done with shopping. All right. neurocoupling, hormone release, cortex activity. These are all like words. I'm just going to put it here. Let's talk about stories. So, stories activate parts in the brain that allow you, like you're the listener, I'm the storyteller. When you're listening to a story, you can make connections between the text and your own ideas, your own experiences, that background knowledge aspect. When you're making those connections, that's neurocoupling. Okay. When you are experiencing the arc of a story, right? You're listening to a story, and then the story is cohesive, complete, coherent. You're activating parts of the brain like Wernicke's and the Broca's areas. The Wernicke's part is going to be your language comprehension part, and Broca's is where we process language. Okay, so when you've got a story that actually has complete, coherent parts, it has good story grammar, right? Those parts are activated. So we need more stories that are like really good. And then and I just skipped the hormone release part, but it is important. Cortisol. Cortisol is released when there's a rising arc. So think of movies, even, and those are narratives. So those count because those would be then listening to a story. We'll take it that way. They prompt like really powerful reaction. Even if you know this is a fake story, it's prompting a really powerful reaction in your brain. Our hormones are activated. Cortisol is released when you are like, oh, this is amazing. Or you're gearing up to be like, what's going to happen? Okay. The other part, dopamine, oxytocin. When there's an emotionally charged event, either directly or indirectly through storytelling, those parts, those hormones are released in our brain. And all of those, y'all, affect memory. And it's super important to create really memorable experiences that are good and positive about school. That's how you do it. So if we want to have an effect where kids keep wanting to come back to school because school's a good place, that hormone release, storytelling. It's the best way, it's the easiest way for us to use narrative intervention. Kids always do really well with it. They never get anything wrong, to try to get them, those kids that hate coming to school, to get them to like coming to school or wanting to be with you. Just throwing that out there, but it's true. Okay. Already asked a question related to visualization and said that they're working with several students that try to memorize words and sentences when narratives are read to them. They require explicit instruction in visualizing to aid their comprehension. How does this relate to executive functioning? So, let me put answer live. Okay. So what's happening when you have students that are trying to memorize words and sentences when a story is being read to them? They have been trained. This is called dysteachia. It is not you, Artie. I'm really hoping it wasn't a behavior analyst working with them. We have put too much into the power behind words or sentences being the answer, and that's all they want. So looking for answers to WH questions, that they're missing the entire discourse structure. Okay. How I would probably work on this, and I know I'm going to get to this in March, but right now, if you all have any students that are in the same boat where they're focused too much on like the little minute and not the bigger picture of the story schema, create a story on your own. If you're familiar with Story Champs, it makes it much easier. But even if the cubed, the narrative language measures, we provide a story frame for you, right? So character, setting, problem, feeling, action, ending, and feeling. So take a really basic story structure, create a story on your own, tell a story about a time that you felt sad. Make it pretty simple, like not traumatic. It doesn't even need to be a real story. The kid's not going to call you a liar. They weren't there. And leave out an important part like the problem. So read this story, maybe draw pictures. Maybe AI is great for this, if you're into that. And so you can have it illustrated, but leave out a key part like the problem or a key part like the consequence or ending. So one of those, a problem, attempt, or action, and the solution, meaning the consequence or ending, those three parts are episodic parts of a story that make a story. Without any one or all or combination thereof of those parts, it is not a story. I don't know what it is that you just told me. Right. So try to practice that. And we're going to try to retrain them to think about listening to an entire story and trying to find what was missing. I will know it's working if and only if they actually will raise their hand and be like, wait a minute, what was his problem? Or like, wait, what did he do? how did the story already end? Then I'm going to know it's working. And that's where I'm working on executive functioning to get them to think about what's wrong and realize something's wrong and then go ahead and ask those questions. So hopefully that gives you a starting point. Story champs will absolutely help, quote unquote, fix where we've trained too tightly. As interventionists or as teachers, we've taught them the wrong parts that, like, these answers, listen out for words, or these WH question parts, and not actually listen to a story and the purpose of a story. So hopefully that helps you. Okay, I've got this really cool slide here that tells you all of these different parts and all exactly what I was just talking about. And then I've got some other pointers that are telling you right now how language comprehension, the relationship it has with reading comprehension. In other words, executive functioning skills affect language comprehension. Language comprehension affects executive functioning, but it's really only language comprehension that has a direct effect on reading comprehension, right? So you can improve students' language comprehension skills if you improve their executive functioning skills. You can improve their executive functioning if you improve their language comprehension. But I'm not going to forego working on language comprehension for the sake of working on executive functioning because it's fun. Like, I'm doing puzzles. Like, there's all these other like interventions that you do. We sit kids in front of a computer to work on executive functioning. That'll be a part of March's webinar. You'll hear me complain. A lot of studies on like computer things instead of people and practicing real like world experiences. We want to care about language comprehension first. Okay. Direct effects, both of them have direct effects on reading fluency and oral language. And as grade levels increase, surprise, surprise, so do the demands of language comprehension and working memory and inhibitory control. Okay. But this, again, I really just want you to remember that executive functioning may, but does not always play a role in reading comprehension difficulties, whereas language comprehension always plays a role in reading comprehension difficulties. Okay. So once kids learn how to decode well, language comprehension skills, not executive functioning, has a strong effect on the development of reading comprehension. Now, implications for practice, right? Planning, monitoring, organization, work on those when you're working on reading and writing. Do not teach any of these things in isolation. We have to work on contextualized interventions. Working memory. Student can hold words in memory during reading, and they need to understand a long, complex sentence. You need cognitive flexibility and shifting to think about multiple ideas in a text at the same time, to shift focus. So those kind of things. Then inhibition, how to not be distracted by irrelevant information in a text, all of those things. So again, I want you guys to work on these individual skills through, and not teach them in isolation, through contextualized intervention. One of the best ways to do that is through narrative intervention. And to do shared reading experiences, have conversations, talk about stories, maybe stop in the middle of a story and say, what do you think is going to happen next? But why? Please always ask the word why. Have students follow up and tell you why they think their answer is the best. For us, we start with story retelling, okay? And then with those story retelling activities, have them do so in a controlled practice, right? Then we've got question number 3. This is the last one. This one is accurate. So, what intervention can best address an individual student's language comprehension needs while also working on executive functioning skills? So, what works best? And it's not narrative intervention, it's contextualized intervention. Okay. All right. That brings us to this. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us at any time, training@languagedynamicsgroup.com. Really appreciate you all being here for this whole thing. And our brains may or may not hurt. If you need a copy of the slides, there's the QR code. We will also send a follow-up recap email with the link. In case you're like curious, you can download the slides. It will have all of these references to some of these readings. Last but not least, oops, okay, well, that was, hold on. Sending. Last but not least, the webinar certificate. Okay, so we we'll send this out with the recap of the video so you can rewatch it or share it. Or you can just click on the link and you'll have those quiz questions. Okay. Thank you all. We would really look forward. I'm going to read all of the feedback. Really, really appreciate your time. Again, I will read all of your feedback so I could always do better, always looking, I'm soliciting feedback. So any welcome information. Don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much, Christy, for helping me. Thank you all. Really appreciate you and hope to see you in the new year. Happy holidays. And yes, Lynn, give me 2 seconds so I can just put the slideshow, the downloads for the slides back up. There you go. Thank you all. Have a good, safe. Susan, do you have a question? Let me see here. There you go. I allowed you to talk, I think.
Yeah, I do not have a question. Thanks.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you, Megan. That was awesome. You're
All
fantastic.
right. Thank you. I will see you soon.